So as I mentioned earlier in the service, Tisha B'Av is this week. In fact, it's such a holiday that the rabbis adjusted the entire liturgical calendar to make sure that the haftorot that we are reading are reflective and connected of Tisha B'Av into the broader calendar year, and that there's a connection with Rosh Hashanah as well. Interestingly enough, even right after the holiday was deemed to be appropriately observed, already we recognize that initially it was to commemorate the destruction of the temple in 586 BCE, and then in 70, and then in the Mishnah, we're reminded that we're supposed to also remember the Jews who did not make it out of Egypt, who got lost in the wilderness. And we also commemorate the Bar Kokhba rebellion and the destruction of Beitar outside of Jerusalem and all of the bloodbath that happened there. It was apparently supposed to be so brutal that the river was flowing with blood as a result of the Romans. And after the expulsion of Spain, Rabbi Isaac Abravanel wrote in 1492 and pointed out that the holiday should also commemorate the expulsion from Spain, in 1492 of the Jews, because they were expelled on the 7th of Av, and he was particularly struck by the closeness of the day, meaning that it was only 2 days apart, and he wrote the expulsion of Jerusalem, which resides in Spain, and he was paraphrasing Obadiah, the prophet. Later, we see that even after that, the rabbis also wanted to add onto everything else with this holiday, and so they decided to markate the commemoration of World War I, in which we saw a total decimation of a generation of young men, which ultimately changed the face of Europe, and political alliances were starting to shift and set into motion a chain reaction leading directly into the Holocaust. And so we see, unfortunately, that loss is also celebrated or commemorated on Tisha B'Av by some people. In fact, Abba Kovner, who was the founder of the Diaspora Museum in Tel Aviv, composed a contemporary martyrology that vibrates with both artistic and spiritual intensity, and that he believes that there is nothing, quote, more whole than a broken Jewish heart. And he writes of 52 episodes of violence that swept across Jewish history, ending in the Holocaust. And while I was walking around the Holocaust Museum just a few days ago, it really got me thinking on yet an even deeper level of the horror that happened, the atrocities that happened. I think sometimes we forget what it must have been like. We're so kind of cozy in our lives in this country. If we don't have food, we can go to Publix very easily and get it. It's not that hard for us to feel safe and secure in our homes, though I understand that for some of us that may have been challenged a few weeks ago. Still, when we think about what it looks like in the Holocaust, it was absolute catastrophe. People were stripped of their rights. They no longer felt secure. They lost their lives, and they were treated as if they were animals. And I realized in walking through that bit of history how maybe there is a point in commemorating Tisha B'Av. It's a holiday that, especially in this country, we don't pay much attention to. We kind of brush over it. We don't want to focus on our religion as a religion that only addresses the negative. They tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. That's not exactly our anthem, and nor should it be. But I also think that lessons can be learned in suffering, lessons that can only be learned in suffering. And I remembered Viktor Frankl when he wrote in his book, his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, in which he provided a really vivid account of his individual experience as a prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp, where he says, quote, "Ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of his life is, but rather must recognize that it is he who is asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. Sometimes we really have to be challenged out of that complacency toward action, and we get there, unfortunately, through pain sometimes. Otherwise, we just sit back. We focus on our own bubble. We think about the fact that the CVS did not have our brand of toothpaste that day, and what a tragedy that was. In reality, that's really not a tragedy, that's more of an annoyance. And the true tragedy is having people's lives disrupted. And unfortunately, having that brokenness sometimes propels us to ask the question which Viktor Frankl was asking, which is, what is it that we are asked of in this life? How is it that we are supposed to go and search for meaning? For Elie Wiesel, the answer, I think, came out of directly from his Holocaust experience when he wrote that the legacy of Holocaust survivors, and he shared this at a conference at Yad Vashem in April of 2002, that whoever listens is a witness and becomes a witness. Meaning whoever listens to survivor stories, whether it's from the Holocaust or any other experience, is a witness. And he goes on to say, we must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. It is for Elie Wiesel, that lesson, that search for meaning, propelled him to be an active bearer, a witness, and want to engage in life so that he not only hears the pain of others, but is inspired to go and address it. And I also remembered and saw on the wall the poem, The Butterfly, which I think inspired me this week, and I'll share it with you briefly. The very last, so richly, brightly, dazzling yellow, perhaps if the sun's tears would sing against a white stone. Such a yellow is carried lightly way up high. It went away, I'm sure, because it wished to kiss the world goodbye. For 7 weeks I've lived in here, pinned up inside this ghetto, but I have found my people here. The dandelions called to me, and the white chestnut candles in the court. Only I never saw another butterfly. That butterfly was the last one. Butterflies don't live in here, in the ghetto. We can, in fact, choose to be detached in suffering. We can, in fact, choose not to see that there is still some good around us, that we can find some meaning in all of it. Whether in this case it was the dandelion and the memory, and I think that's why the author, Pavel Friedman, was playing with yellow and the whole idea of yellow stars. And that if you kind of look at a yellow star folded up, it can kind of look like a butterfly. We can kind of see that life can stretch and grow, and we can come in from a cocoon out into inspiring things without being labeled. But more than that, that even in suffering, there's a possibility to find meaning, to strive to be good, to strive to be a better person. I have to, and I'll close with this. When Lisa shared with me earlier this week that we're in fact cousins, and that I'm standing in the hall where my family donated money to have names after, that apparently my cousin was a temple president here for 20 years, a job that I have to say OMG to, because that sounds like so much fun right there. Simon Becker will agree with that right now. It's awe-inspiring. Like that I'm part of a broader chain of tradition. And it makes me want to ask the question that Viktor Frankl asked. He came here and searched for meaning and decided that for him, the meaning that he was going to invent logarithm therapy and go on and help people create meaning from their suffering. So knowing that we're all part of a broader chain of tradition, knowing that sometimes we can only recall that through suffering, it begs the question, what will you do with that knowledge? And what will I do? I'm still trying to figure that out. I'll let you know, I'll keep you posted. But I can tell you that it's going to continue to try and strive to be the best person I can be and be a light unto others. So may that inspire you to be that light to other people. Shabbat Shalom.